Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing Summerween series, celebrating hot weather and horror movies by bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of Argentina.
In this episode, we are talking about When Evil Lurks, a 2023 indie film written and directed by Demián Rugna. In this episode, we're going to discuss the film within the context of the possession subgenre of horror, and we're also going to talk about the paradoxical and wildly effective excess and restraint present in the film. Let's get into it.
All right, first things first, I'm Cam. Obviously, Maggie's here from the intro, but we are joined by our very favorite and unfortunately occasional co-host, Tristan.
I'm still waiting for the contract to be renewed for this to be a regular thing, but, I'll continue to abide the fans.
We're very excited to have him back, and last night we were looking at this short list of movies, and we were pitching, I don't know, maybe we cover a classic, we do the original Halloween, we do this, we do that, and then there was this indie folk horror Shudder exclusive thing that we've had on the list for a couple years now, and we finally watched When Evil Lurks.
Evil did, in fact, lurk. It was very scary.
It did. So I want to start there, but I'll introduce the movie first. So it's 99 minutes long. This is an independent Argentinian horror film written and directed by Demián Rugna from 2023. And just the little pitch, the little brief one-liner is, in a remote village, two brothers find a demon-infected man just about to give birth to evil itself. They decide to get rid of the body, only to end up unintentionally spreading chaos. So to throw to you guys individually, maybe we'll start with Tristan. What are your impressions after watching this happy-go-lucky friends get together for a movie night?
Yeah, definitely a feel-good film. I gotta say, from the intro blurb that you just gave, when I heard that it was going to be a movie about a man giving birth to something evil, that was what actually sent me over the edge. I was like, all right, well, we got to see that, because that I didn't know what was meant by that. Is he actually physically giving birth, or is he like manifesting something? So I was hooked from there. So wild film.
What were based on the pitch that we saw and just the poster when we clicked on the movie and the first couple minutes, what were your expectations versus what was your experience?
I honest to God, did not have any expectations at all. I can probably count on one hand the number of foreign language horror films, and I say foreign language, I speak Spanish, but a film that requires subtitles, right, to truly get everything out of it, especially in the horror genre. So I didn't know what to expect at all. And moreover, I've never seen an Argentinian horror film specifically. So there were no preconceived notions about what the cultural schema for creating something like that was. So I was truly unspoiled, and I had absolutely no preconceived notion of what was going to happen.
It's a wonderful place to be in. I mean, the three of us have watched a ton of horror movies together and independently, and I love that position of not having any context. We've talked about that just in the last... Basically, this year, we watched the Norwegian horror film, The Ugly Stepsister. We've talked about French horror. We did remember the Vortilac?
Oh,
that was a fucked up French puppet vampire thing. Every time we leave our wheelhouse of United States little no-budget indie horror, we really get our minds expanded.
I was going to say, that's why I was really excited for this movie. I didn't have a ton of expectations going in because I hadn't heard much. I just knew you had heard about it, and it was on our vague list of things we want to watch and discuss on the show. But I'm always excited when I'm watching a non-American horror film, because as much as we talk about Americans being depraved and morally...
Do we?
Yes, everyone talks about American culture as being so I don't know, just not, I don't know, we're not respected, right? But most of the time, non-American horror films tend to go much further than we are willing to do, and they're much more interesting and innovative. And we were saying last night, we were loving how, not only how, how far this movie goes and how interesting it is, but also that it's not trying to be subversive or meta. It's just actually doing the thing. It's just engaging in the folk horror, and it's just telling a great story without trying to subvert or comment upon something. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's what I liked about it.
And I think Tristan made that comment, and I want to go back to that for a second, because what is that American sensibility? Because when you said that, in my head I thought about the meta thing meaning some sort of ironic context, but I'm interested in the commenting on a social issue. Like, what does that mean to you, that sensibility that was absent here?
Yeah, so I think when I talk about, or when I say American horror, it's the idea that that when you go into a summer blockbuster horror film in America, that there's going to be jump scares. That it's going to start fairly slow. You might have a stinger in the beginning, but it's going to start pretty slow. It's going to ramp up. You're going to get some glimpses of creepy things. And I mean, you could say that of any film generally. You got your rising action, and then you're eventually going to hit the climax and everything. But specifically in American horror, that certain things are off limits as well. That they're not going to kill the kids. Right? That they're not going to, some of the more violent things don't tend to happen on screen, unless you're watching Terrifier. But there's an ebb and flow that you have come to expect when going and viewing a horror movie that's made in the U.S. by an American director. And you can't really escape that, because that stuff is ingrained. When you're making anything, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So the easiest way to put something out like that is to follow in the footsteps of those that came before, for better and for worse, right? There are certain aspects of that you carry over, negative things as well. But it all leads itself to, okay, this is what we know as the horror film experience, in America. And so when I say I didn't think that I was going to see that in this, or I guess I wasn't prepared to watch a horror film that didn't hit those normal beats, right? So it was nice to have that expectation sort of, eschewed in favor of something wildly different.
I think there's, I really like that kind of modification of the American sensibility. I think the other aspect, which is so quintessential for this country, is money. And I think it's not like a censorship of, plenty of other countries that we could watch horror movies from would have different laws about freedom of expression and speech and art. And that's not really the case here yet. It's more about self-censorship, because you don't want to alienate the audience, because you might want a sequel. You don't want it to be unrated because it won't make as much money. It's pulling punches in the name of box office returns. So we're kind of neutering our own excess. And I feel like every time we leave the umbrella of the US, we get these films that just completely fuck up our expectations and have these brutal, horrifying, unafraid scares.
Yeah, totally. Cam, what were your expectations and then impressions once we watched it?
I think it was hopes. I think if this had been... Maggie, you and I have covered a lot of horror movies lately that are almost advertised as being unrated. I mean, that's been the whole thing about most of the Terrifier movies.
That's like the appeal, right?
The Toxic Avenger, a month ago at this point?
Like 2 or 3 weeks ago.
And that whole advertising campaign is, this was an indie movie that none of the studios would buy because it was so excessive and gross.
Right.
So it was marketed as unrated and uncut. And it was fairly tame.
It was pretty tame, yeah.
It was more just, I guess, no studio bought it.
So was it actually unrated the one we saw?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I liked that, but I think
Sure.
it being advertised so heavily as unrated set me up for the expectations of it being this gonzo gore fest. And it wasn't. It was fun.
Yeah.
I liked that movie a lot, but
we talked all about it.
I think that frames expectations in a really particular way. Versus this film, which I just saw as non-American indie horror movie that's on Shudder. And we, incidentally, cover half the movies Shudder releases anyway.
Yeah.
So I think I went into this looking for that pedigree, thinking about Hell House, or even, I believe, Ugly Stepsister was on Shudder.
It was, yeah.
And I think Terrifier might be too.
Also, Jenny Penn, there were lots on there. Yeah.
Again, we cover half their filmography. So I think I was looking for that, where it had a distinct voice, it was original, it was fresh, and it didn't have those major franchise limitations like we just talked about in the Conjuring series, maybe, or Insidious, or any of these kind of big 4-quadrant horror films. But I'm glad this wasn't labeled an unrated horror film, but I think it delivered that for me. What I want from an unrated horror film. I'm glad that I got the jump scare, that I wasn't warned that this was going to be so excessive and troubling and gory and violent, but I think it actually lived up to that label in the way that none of the films that are marketed as unrated actually do.
Right, and even apart from the meta filmography lens, right? I was also to put a finer point on what I mean by having my expectations sort of subverted here, is that it was also playing with a cultural, a set of cultural lore, I guess, that I am unfamiliar with, right? So I'm not familiar with the legends and lore of Argentina, right? And so going into this movie with the rules that are sort of established about the evil presence and everything, I wasn't sure if that is something that is part of local folklore in Argentina, or if it was specific to the rules of this film. But either way, it wasn't some sort of established lore, a legendarium that I'm familiar with, right? You know that you kill werewolves with silver. You know that you kill vampires with a stake, and they don't like garlic and all that. When they were talking about the rotten, and they introduced the idea that you can't kill them with guns, or they'll it'll get infinitely worse. I've never heard of anything like that. And so it does lend itself to the mystery behind the film. You're going, what are the rules really? And there's even a part in the film where they go through the actual established set of rules, and you're like, am I supposed to know this? And you absolutely, I didn't going in. So that question of like, okay, what am I supposed to keep track of? What can they and what can't they do? That was really refreshing, because when you know the lore, you have some sort of an understanding of the way it's going to go and the direction it's going to go and how the plot's going to play itself out. And I had no idea of what was going to happen here, and I really like that aspect.
And I think it helped that I think we were all in the same place. It was a moving target where we didn't know if we were missing out on this cultural context or if it was purely fictional. But I loved that the brothers, as kind of the core of the film, they didn't know either. So it still felt accessible. And I still don't really know, but it didn't end up mattering. There was an audience surrogate for us to kind of latch onto.
And I think it also just served to make the world feel more lived in and real. Yeah. Like it wasn't just, this is a brand new thing that we're all being introduced to together. It was more, this is an established, seems like decades, if not centuries old thing that's either been, maybe if it hasn't been real and present in this village in Argentina, it's at least been known and feared and talked about. And so having all of these pre-established rules and ideas about this strange mythology, which then becomes a reality, makes it all feel just more again lived in and more possible. And it almost makes the village itself feel sort of like this special otherworldly place that we're just visiting. And it's like this strange thing, because it's just confined to this one village. We don't really even see them talk about, at least not that I remember, they don't express fear about the thing spreading beyond their village. That's not really the concern. It's more, is it going to spread beyond my house and into my neighbor's house, or go down the road to somebody else that I know? And I liked that it made this place feel very particular and frightening and almost otherworldly. It was really cool, but at the same time, believable.
Yes, and it reminds me of two horror discussions we've had in the last couple of weeks about Somnium and The Long Walk, where both of those films are very carefully outside of time and place. Do you think that choice here gave the film a similar universality? Yes,
I think so. And it made the whole thing feel kind of surreal and mythical. But it also felt so grounded in reality, in family and messed up family dynamics. I mean, there's stuff about, a guy having a restraining order against his wife and kids, and it's two brothers. It didn't feel so out of time and place that it was surreal, but it was more just it felt very special and mythical, but also very this could happen in your village too. Your village, your town could become this weird mythical thing.
The setting kept it grounded, and I think the rules kept it grounded. Tristan, you really, I like that we're talking about the rules early, because you really popped when one of the rules was explained in the film about the attempted possession of one of the sons who was autistic. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, it was a very cool way of introducing and adding a kink into the accepted way that possession tends to occur, right? In any possession movie, regardless of where it's at or where it's from, I mean, somehow, some way, usually it's a surprise. The character is all of a sudden not in control of their actions, and they're being led astray by this evil that's within them, and they are firmly in control. One of the son of the main character, he's autistic in this film, and he's nonverbal, and he has a hard time communicating, and there's a whole deal about them trying to transport him and get him into the car and everything. They finally do that, and then he's while he's sitting in the car, he continues to be nonverbal, but it looks like he's going through some sort of stress, and then our Yoda in the film, the person who comes along to explain some of the lore and how everything works, Sheila. Yes, her name is Mirta. Mirta is our Yoda throughout this one, and when she comes along is when the plot really starts to move, and you sort of get some more understanding of exactly what kind of supernatural forces at play, and that there is a whole sect of individuals that have risen to fight this, and she's part of that. So she knows a little bit more than our leads do, even though it does seem to be understood that this is going on in this world. This is a known quantity, but they're not experts in it. She is. And so she takes our lead character out into the car, and she removes a blanket that is on the son, and she shows that his hands are like twisted at odd angles and very, very weird, looks very painful. And she explains that he looks like that because the demon that's trying to possess him cannot figure out his mind, because it works differently than a neurotypical person. And I thought that was just such an inventive way to explain that, to work that into the supernatural. It's very rare that you see real life problems being integrated, or real life situations be integrated into the supernatural.
It was I felt like it was as thoughtful as it was creative. And that's a really hard line to ride in a horror movie that is otherwise so brutal and grotesque.
Right. Like, I feel like a different horror movie, a less interesting one, a more boring one, would have just made it be like, oh, the demons can more easily possess, an autistic person because they're more vulnerable. And like, that's it. And like, oh, they're more susceptible to possession. But this was like, no, the mind works differently and they can't figure that out. And that's like, I feel like is more realistic, as realistic as demon possession can be. And I really liked that innovation. It was cool.
And I think it speaks to a real, again, a thoughtfulness at the core of this film, where it's not just about we'll talk about the kind of shock horror and the brutality of it in a second, but there really is a beating heart of curiosity and creativity underneath this that makes me want to rewatch it. So I want to move into the second area we wanted to talk about here, and this is variations on a theme. And while we were watching the movie, we were occasionally briefly talking, which I know is against our rules, but sometimes we need it. And it's good when you get the whole team together.
You can also read subtitles while talking to each other. So we weren't really missing a whole lot because the subtitles were there. But
two massive touchstones for us after watching this film. I want to throw them out there, and then we can just kind of compare and contrast. The first one is The Witch, which we all saw together for the first time when it released.
That's
I think
right, we did.
It rewired all of our brains. It set the template for what became this show. And the elements that I want to just kind of popcorn there are the idea of a remote family imploding in slow motion, the folk horror elements, the abstract mysticism, and the possession.
Plus, there was an evil goat.
There was an evil goat. There was a Black Phillip. Yes, there was. So what do we make of that comparison? Is it fair? What did these films do differently?
There was also a black pig. I said that's Black Pete. And then that was before we knew that there was going to be an actual goat. So, I would retcon that at this point in time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's because that's probably the biggest, at least American folk horror movie in the last decade. It's hard not to draw parallels to that, because you do have this really rural setting. You're sort of isolated. It's a very intimate look at the impact that the supernatural forces are having on this family and the community around them. But the community around them is not much larger. I think in total, our main cast is maybe 6-7 people. So you really get you get the sense that this is a localized problem. There's no help. They attempt to get help from like the police department and this sect of folks that have come to fight this sort of evil, but there's no lifeline, and so that they're on their own, and it's strange because I think that this film does a good job of, yes, it's contemporary, it's happening, there are cars, there are cell phones, but it really has a unique element that makes it feel like a modern day fable in a way, because more than any modern film that I can remember in recent history, we get a lot of signposts about what these people are not supposed to do that they just absolutely blow through, right? And so it really is like, the tortoise and the hare. The rabbit keeps stopping, and he's like, I've got time, I can do it. And the whole time the story is like, well, slow and steady wins. Well, that's what happens here, right? There's a degree of hubris that goes throughout the film. It permeates everything. Constantly you see characters making decisions that have explicitly been outlawed because they can't get over themselves. It's not clear if this is spurred on by the supernatural or if it's because they just feel so strongly about the thing that they can't help it. But it really does draw a parallel to what happens with Thomasin.
Yes.
She sees so much throughout her film. She, so much weighs on her psyche throughout, and then eventually she just has one option in her mind at the end. And I guess you could say that you see that thought process play out for basically the entirety of the film through various different characters. Primarily the main character, Pedro, to whom it happens several times throughout. There's any number of points in the film that you say, if he makes the right decision here, maybe this crisis is averted. But he's doomed, sort of like Thomasin was, and he dooms other people through his actions. Because I think it's important to clarify, like Thomasin, he survives to the end of this film, and the destruction and chaos happens to all of those around him.
Yes, I really love that tag of fable. I think it's a really slippery term because when we use that in a shorthand for horror movies, I feel like to the general public it just means small cast, one location. But I love that connection almost to morality plays or cautionary tales. Is that the element of folk tales that you're saying that this appeals to?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right? And obviously, fables have the connotation of being, pretty childish, like you're trying to get, like you said, a moral out of it. But it's sort of if the Brothers Grimm were the first evolution into a fairly violent and scary retelling of a fable, this is the next step beyond that, right? It takes that established paradigm of you have a setting in a situation, you know what's not supposed to happen, the character is essentially, the character knows what he's not supposed to do, he's going to do it anyway, he does it, and then he has to live with the consequences. That is very present here, and I think that that is a tried and true type of story that has existed throughout history, and it's cool to see that here because I think frequently, in the name of creating something that is quote unquote new and exciting and different, you eschew that in favor of something that is more visually striking or something and less quote unquote predictable. But I think you can see the train coming a mile away in this one, but it doesn't matter. Because the affect is still there at the end of it, and I think that's what makes it a fable.
Yes, and I think like The Witch, two things there. It has this hint of societal pressure and norms. At the beginning of The Witch, you have the family exiled from the Puritan colony. And in here, when we're slowly getting the magic system of the demons, we're also learning bit by bit how this remote, wherever it is in time and space, village is reacting to these possessions. And we find out that the town has a protocol where they turn off all the lights because electric lights will somehow interfere with or attract the demons. The other thing is, one of the most enduring images for me about The Witch is when Thomasin finally goes to sleep at the table in the house after the whole family's been wiped out. And then there's that time jump, and she wakes up later, and then she goes off and we get the great ending. I feel like that same moment of total familial desolation happens here, but they don't do the wake up and the demon thing at the end. They sort of leave that more ambiguous. And when you were talking, I realized that as metal a title as When Evil Lurks is, given that the brothers are the only people who survive, you could have called this movie The Brothers Grimm. And that would have foregrounded the folktale element too. Maggie, what did you think about the comparison with The Witch? Because I know that is a huge touchstone and compliment for all three of us.
Definitely. I mean, I definitely saw The Witch here, and I think that comparison is really interesting. And one thing that I'm really kind of curious about, because I don't have an answer, is the more like specific folklore element. So this is like the fable element of this is definitely present, and there are universal things about like good and evil, families and families falling apart. That's like culturally universal, but I'm really curious about the specific cultural elements as well, because The Witch is very much about not American culture per se, because the story takes place pre-America, but it's about puritanical isolation and paranoia and control, which is sort of the foundation of a lot of American thought and philosophy, oddly enough. So it's very focused on that. It's very embedded in like puritanical mindset and religion. And I'm curious, because I don't have a strong cultural understanding of Argentina or its history. I'm curious how much it's leaning into that specific element in When Evil Lurks. And I would be curious to hear what somebody who is either from Argentina or knows Argentinian history could say about that, because there are parts of this that do, like we say, feel specific or, in tune to an existing lore or mythology. And maybe not. Maybe everything in this film is invented, but I'm curious how much this is like tied to a specific cultural touchstone the way that The Witch is.
Are you curious in the way that you actually want answers, or in the way that you should have some level of curiosity and remoteness and abstraction about the villains and magic system in a horror movie?
I think both, because even in The Witch, not everything is answered. I mean, I'm familiar with Puritanism, and so I understand a lot of the issues and concerns and conflicts that happen in The Witch that are connected to that. But there's a lot about The Witch that's not explained. They don't give a rundown of all the lore. And so I would kind of want just a bit more understanding for When Evil Lurks, but also I like the ambiguity.
I feel like sometimes with lore like that, if you set up too much of it, the audience is left just wanting more. Like the room of all the props in The Conjuring, that immediately teases a franchise to explore all that. Do you think there's enough of that folklore here that we could do more in this? Do you want a sequel to this movie? Because I don't think we would ever want a sequel to The Witch.
I think it's kind of wrapped up. I don't think there's room for more. I mean, I would be curious to check out more Argentinian horror for sure and learn about Argentinian folklore. But I don't really think that there's room in this film for it to continue.
I mean, I think this film could continue. I think, to my mind, the clear plot device that's been set up is that, okay, you've got these two brothers now that are absolutely bereft, right? The lead character, Pedro, fails in his attempt to essentially exorcise or cleanse this rotten, because he, again, gives in to his base urge to simply kill it physically instead of doing it in the ceremonial way that our Yoda, Myrta, told him he had to do. And so as a result, it appears that everyone around them, except for the two brothers, is dead. It's unclear if the oldest son, the one that's autistic, is still alive at the end of the film, because the final shot is just the two brothers essentially just grieving. But to me, the clear plot point that this could continue from is they could take up arms and basically go and find the people who trained Myrta and fight this moving forward. If they have nothing else to lose, right? And then you want to get some sort of a revenge. Like all of the tools that Myrta was going to use to truly exorcise this demon are left behind in the school. I could see, the continuation of this being they go pick up all of that stuff and go figure out how to use it to get some sort of retribution and maybe put the cat back in the bag for what they unleashed. But I did want to say there was a discussion about puritanical elements that existed in The Witch, and I think that there was a a concerted effort here to make this film as secular as possible. There were several instances where they referred to the church as being dead. I don't know what that means.
Right.
I don't know if it means that there was some sort of, by virtue of demons being revealed, that there was some sort of crisis of faith and people just simply abandoned it because they felt like, I don't know, God had left them or something. But the characters in this film did not lean on religion as a means of protection or as a means of explanation. It was really never even considered. So it is the void there. I'm not sure what the point is, what is meant by leaving that absent, but there is a reason that it's gone. It might be to differentiate and distinguish this film from a normal, exorcism film, right? The priest isn't going to come in and save the day. And honestly, taking away that higher power as some sort of feel-good protection element that you feel like you can lean on and rely. The only thing that we see here is the rampant evil that it perverts even the most basic signs of comfort that we have. We can't use lights, right? And in fact, the reason that the demon comes in and ultimately kills the children in this one is because they see the kids' nightlight.
Yeah.
There is just a lack of any sense of comfort or peace or protection. Mm-hmm. And I think that is achieved by not there's no, I don't recall seeing any crosses throughout the film. Maybe the mom's necklace had one on it. But it's just a subtle nod to this used to be a thing. But it was never a primary character or aspect of what our leads dealt with.
It really does make it stand out, because every other possession movie ends in some form of chanting and the power of Christ compel you. But I love that idea of not turning back to religion, because every time we've ever talked about Faustus, the idea is he's a theologian who doesn't know if Christianity is true. And once he summons a demon, he knows it's all true. So I would expect most cultures, if the demon pops up, to lean even harder into religion. But to go back to the folklore and the cautionary tale and the moral signposts, this decision at the end of the dad, I guess, spoilers, of the main character to kill the remaining rotten in the wrong way, which is just his sort of catharsis and exasperation. Do you think the film presents that as him making the wrong choice?
I don't think so. I think it was more just there's no winning. Because there's this preoccupation with the rules and how do we do it right. But as we've said earlier, over and over and over again, people don't follow the rules. They end up using guns. They end up pulling out lights. They don't do what they're supposed to do to defeat this thing. And to me, what that tells me is not that these people are dumb or can't listen to rules. Or that they're too impulsive. It's that the fear that this evil instills and manipulates and takes advantage of causes you, prevents you from winning. It means you cannot beat this thing no matter what, even if you know the rules and try to follow them. To me, it just felt like evil taking over is inevitable and there's nothing you can do about it. That's sort of what I saw it as. It's not his failing. There's nothing to be done.
Yes.
It's pretty bleak.
That's exactly where I was going. Do you think this ending is any bleaker than The Witch?
Yes, because even though Thomasin does become a witch, she seems happy. I mean, it's not like it was a good thing that this happened. Obviously, her whole family is dead.
Yeah.
But she has found a way to move forward and maybe be freed from a lot of the restrictions and paranoia that were the norm within her family.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yes, feel-good film of 2015, The Witch. No, I guess you could take it as it's a commentary on human nature, right? Because I think as human beings, we know we're not supposed to kill. We know we're not supposed to commit crimes. And we're told that from day one. People still end up doing things, right? And so maybe it's not that there is a specific supernatural element going on that is causing these things. Maybe they feed the fear, But what's going on with the rotten and the supernatural elements is really just giving enough fodder to feed the base instincts that lead them to making the wrong decision, which ultimately continues to propagate the evil throughout the land. And what we see is sort of again, spoilers. The rotten does end up giving birth to this new fledgling evil that you get the sense is more powerful than anything that we've seen. It's a child. There's a lot to talk about as far as the way that children are treated in this film too, and we'll get to that in a bit. But that child being born sort of as a perversion of innocence, right? It's like I don't know what the opposite of innocence is, but it's that pure. I mean, guilt, obviously, but it is a pure representation of the opposite of innocence. But the important thing to remember is that once this evil is born, he literally walks out of the corpse that he's birthed from, and it doesn't kill Pedro.
Yeah.
It walks by him, places a hand on his head, and it leaves a mark, but it's just like a stain. It's not like a gash or scratches or anything. It's just the fingerprints. And he lets him go.
It's interesting that you said guilt as the opposite of innocence, because I was going to say corruption. And I think that's what he does to the main character. He breaks him. He doesn't need to kill him. He's destroyed him in every other way, and it's somehow worse. We're going to talk about weapons in a second, but just to follow up on that, did you view the kid covered in blood who's birthed from the rotten at the end of the film, did you view that as a new host for this line of possession, or did you view that as like the true evil in its final form?
That is in its purest form, the evil. I don't know what it can do or whatever, but you get the sense that it's more powerful than the rotten that came before, because the rotten seem to need people in order to act, to get to the next level, so that it can sublimate the new evil. But you get the sense that the new evil is its own agent, and that it's going to be able to accomplish whatever it needs to I don't know what the end goal is, to infect whatever, but it is infinitely more powerful than what we've seen before.
Yes. Yeah. Maggie, what did you read that final form as?
Similar. And I think just to continue that, I think what's happening now is that the thing has moved on from this village and is going to move to the next one. That's sort of because it's sort of like, okay, my job is done here. I don't need to kill Pedro and Jimmy because their lives are now ruined. Their whole family is dead. They have fully succumbed to or been overtaken by the despair and fear that this evil causes and again sort of exacerbates. So I think it was all right, I've done my job. Now I'm going to move forward. I've literally left my mark upon these people, and now I will go and do this again somewhere else. That's kind of how I took it.
But in the next town, it will blend in. I was
yes,
expecting
it'll enter somebody else and form a new rotten. That's kind of what I figured.
Or just look like any other kid. I was expecting kind of a Rosemary's Baby reveal of maybe it has horns or it freaks out anyone who looks at it. But if you wash off the blood, it looks like just a normal kid.
That's a good point.
And that maybe is even more bleak and even more insidious.
And then it just goes and infiltrates.
That it has corrupted and now or taken upon this most innocent form.
Interesting. I think this discussion about kids is a great way to move into our comparison to weapons.
Absolutely. Thank you for the assist there.
You're very welcome.
Because I think the variations on a theme here with weapons, it's the school setting. It's all of the kids with the weird makeup and the lime. Wasn't that what it was? That was all over them
it was
from
lime,
hiding the bodies?
Yeah, to hide the smell of the decaying bodies, yeah.
But it was also that over the course of weapons, you get this kind of breadcrumb reveal of this folkloric witch versus our discussion of the witch, which is kind of there from the very beginning. From the second Samwell is taken, there's a witch because you see her grinding him up over the thing and she's doing the little dance. But here with this kind of slow burn reveal of the magic system and the evil, what did you make of this comparison to weapons, which is, of course, in much more recent memory, but is another really unorthodox possession horror movie?
Yes, because our argument is not that that this director was like stealing from weapons. It's more that these comparisons
2 years before it was made.
Yeah, right. Like, and he wasn't even necessarily influenced by The Witch. I don't know if he saw The Witch. It doesn't matter. The point is that there are similar things, and that's interesting. Well, so we haven't talked about weapons on here.
We talked about it on the Patreon that's coming out in a couple weeks.
Did we?
Yes.
Cam, I have
it's
no
in a breakfast
recollection
buffet.
of
It's
that
in a
discussion.
roundup.
I have no recollection of that discussion.
Well, that's a mark of quality.
Well, okay, because we liked it, but it wasn't fantastic, and that's why I was mentioning that. And I think this movie tackles a lot of the things that Weapons was going for, I think, more effectively and better. I liked Weapons, and it did some innovative things, but Cam, I don't remember that discussion at all. That's actually really throwing me right now, but it's fine.
I thought it was pretty good.
I believe you. I can't wait to listen back to it.
What a great ad for the Patreon.
Holy shit.
$2 a month for conversations. Even the hosts don't remember.
Shit, it's just blacked out. No, but and I liked that the focus on kids slowly came about as the movie went on, right? Because you start out with Jimmy and Pedro, the brothers, and you meet the young kid who's the brother of the not the possessed, the rotten older brother early on, and so he's kind of like your only kid. And then you meet Pedro's kids, and then you meet the kids at the school. So it's like more and more kids pop up, and more of them are horribly attacked and killed and used by this creature or this evil. And so I liked that it was a different sort of introduction into like getting you to think about children and innocence. And then there's a great line in the movie. Do you remember what it was? It was like evil
loves children and children love evil.
And it was like a school is a great place to hide this thing. And I thought that was a much more interesting dive into those ideas versus what is done in Weapons. I really liked it.
Yeah, it's strange. I'd have to go back and listen to what was said if it was like a variation on the word querer, like it's like to want or to love. And I would be curious to know from the director what the intent was. If the intent is love or want. Like if children love the evil or want the evil, it's the same verb. Both of those are obtained from the same word. So I'm curious, and you know what? Maybe the ambiguity is intentional there. But Maggie, I think you were exactly right when you say the way that the children integrate to the story ramps up over time. But as we've been discussing all of this, it's sort of modified my understanding of the film because each and every step of the film, viewed in hindsight, is related in some way to the children that appear in the film. Whether that's physically, because they are actors and agents in it, or if it's because the decisions that are being made throughout the film by our lead characters, the adults, are directly because of the children that exist in their lives. You cannot tell this story without nodding to the impact that the children are having throughout the entire thing.
They're almost every inciting incident. They're every plot device.
Yes, I was going to say that's so true because, like, if you think about it, okay, so the main guy who is, I keep wanting to say possessed. He's not corrupt. He's rotten. His mother is trying to protect him and also her younger son, and that's what starts to cause some problems. And then when we get Ruiz, the reason he and his family fall apart is because he is worried for his unborn child because his wife is pregnant, and that's how that shit happens. And then he uses the gun and things get worse. And of course we see everything with Jimmy. Every decision he makes is in an effort to try and protect his children, but of course that all backfires. So you're so right. Everything that happens is because of a desire to protect children or save them or prevent bad things from happening, even though the kids don't do anything wrong, but they're the ones who
do a lot of things wrong. And I think that line of the children love evil and the evil loves children, by the end of the movie, we're blurring, the ultimate form of evil is a child. So we're blurring this line between evil and children. To kind of riff on the title here, if the title of the movie is When Evil Lurks, it could also be When Children Lurk. If they are the propulsion for every single element of this plot, what do we make of that synthesis?
Well, I think that's the cautionary tale at the end of the film, is that the corruption that the adults or the demons, whatever, bring into the world, the ultimate terrible thing happening is that corrupts children in the absolute. I think that's ultimately the cautionary tale and what what ultimately the characters in Myrta were trying to avoid. It's why the ultimate evil is this child, the devil child, because that is the perfection of the corruption, right? Because once the things that are impacting us as adults make their way into the children, it's sort of done because the cycle's going to repeat, right? And I think that's the commentary going on there, and it's helped me. I mean, talking this out has helped me gain a better understanding of the message that the film was trying to send, right? Because some of the most shocking, we've kind of glossed over it so far. The way children are treated in this movie is shocking.
Yeah.
From the very the first thing that we see that sort of intimates this or lets you know where it's going is this probably 4-year-old girl gets absolutely mauled by a dog. And you literally see the dog freak out and just grab her in the face and start running around with her like a rag doll. It's wild.
And it's so menacing in the way that it's filmed. The movie's filmed so beautifully because you keep going back to this shot in between the adults arguing. You see this almost establishing shot of the back profiles of the daughters, I think Vicky, of her head and the dog. And it feels like you're just watching, oh, the kids are watching the adults fight. That's going to mess them up and get them in therapy later. And the more times you see that image, we're already implanting that horror in our heads. And when it actually happens, it's so much more horrifying than you've even feared.
Because you don't expect to see it. You're like, okay, I know what's about to happen. The dog already sniffed the infected clothes. The dog's going to get possessed first. We kind of know the rules. So we're anticipating the dog's going to do something bad. He's probably going to hurt a kid. He's a big dog. But as we kind of hinted earlier, American films would not show this. They would have it off screen. You would see the dog lunge for the child, and then you would hear a scream and maybe see her feet being dragged, maybe. But you wouldn't see this happen. But we fully see the dog grab onto her face, and it's actually so horrifying. And what makes it even more horrifying is we are seeing it, and then it pans over, like you said, Cam. This is directed so beautifully. It pans over, and the brother, he's probably like 6, 7.
Santino,
yes. Yeah. He is also seeing this happen. And so he is just horrified as we are. And so we have to see not only this happen to this little girl, but also see the impact it has on the boy. And it's so, so troubling and not what you expect to see at all.
It's consequence. That's another huge theme through this movie, is watching all those horrible dominoes fall.
Right. And then once this happens, you're like, surely this girl is dead. There's no way she survives this. Well, they chase her down. They chase the dog down, and they ultimately do find her, and she looks perfectly fine. And that is unnerving in and of itself, because you're like, okay, that is not the little girl. And then that's confirmed whenever she's like giving her mom a hug, and she goes, "Dad's gonna kill you." And then sure enough, the dad does come in a truck and just absolutely runs over the both of them.
Yeah.
And again, you see this little girl flung 40 feet.
Yeah.
And the scene at the end of the scene, you do see that she's still there, she's still alive, but she's dancing around. And it's the idea there is that she's been possessed fully by something else. And so I thought, at that point in time, I was like, all right, that was pretty traumatic, but that's the way that they're going to get around this. They didn't show the girl dying or dead. There was violence that occurred, but she ended up being okay at the end. And I thought that that's where they were going to leave it with the child violence. I was absolutely, irrefutably incorrect, because the most affecting aspect of violence that occurred to a child in this one is that, so our main characters, once this happens, once that girl gets possessed, our main characters flee. The 2 brothers and then Pedro's 2 sons, they flee town in a car, right? They leave all of this behind them, and they ultimately they grab Pedro's mother. They find her on the way, and then they go to this rural house of Myrta, who Jimmy, Pedro's brother, happens to know from the past. You get the sense that they have a romantic history. So they go to that house. She's like, I don't have any electricity or whatever. And you get the sense that this is the closest thing to a safe house that you're going to have. Well, it turns out that Pedro's ex-wife, the mother of Vicky and Santino, has been possessed. After she got run over by the car, she chases them on foot, and in the night, she makes it to Myrta's house. She's drawn to them because of Santino's nightlight, like I said before, and we see ultimately that she kidnaps Santino in her demon form and starts walking off with him. When this happens, the brothers realize, oh my God, we got to do something. And they sort of split up. Pedro and Myrta, Pedro is Santino's father. Pedro and Myrta end up going to try to find the Rotten to put an end to this, while Jimmy takes a car and goes to try to find Santino, who's been kidnapped by the mother. Sabrina, yes. And so we see this, like the story splits off in these two prongs, and we see it happening in parallel, cut from one to the other. And we see Jimmy finally catch up to Sabrina. And we're like, okay, great. She's still carrying the kid. Maybe he can save Santino at this point in time. Well, and again, he's driving a car, but he's not allowed to use the headlights, right? Because they can't use electric lights. It attracts the evil. So he keeps on flickering them on and off. And in this process, he flickers them on, and he sees Sabrina, and okay, he's going to go save him. Well, he drives up to it, and you see from behind, Sabrina is carrying the kid, so you still see the legs and the arms because he's being carried. He's about 7. He's fairly big. And then he drives up close enough, and you see this horrifying image of the possessed mother literally eating the brains out of the head of the kid. And I cannot think of an image ever in a horror movie that is more affecting and disturbing than that one. And it caught me off guard because of what I said before about the girl having lived, the little girl Vicky having lived. I thought, okay, that's as far as they're going to take the child violence. I have never seen a movie show that at that level.
I read an interview where the director, he was describing how he wrote that scene. And apparently in the script, it's written as, it looks like she's eating popcorn out of his head.
That's exactly what I thought. I was like, she's literally digging around like it's an AMC popcorn bucket.
Yeah,
and I was thinking, some props guy had to make this prosthetic child and make his head, like remove the top and have the brains. Like, it was so horrifying. And I knew the kid wasn't going to live. At this point, I was like, okay, I think this is not going to go well. But I was not prepared for that really, really upsetting image.
I want to talk about the excess of all of this, but to just put a button on the weapons discussion. After Vicky is possessed and she does this dancing and the smiling, you become suspicious of her. You assume she is now the closest thing we have to a monster. And I think every time you see a child after that, you're suspicious of them because you never see Santino alive again. So all of the kids after that point become corrupted. They are villains or demons or something that you don't trust. How do we contrast that attitude towards children in horror versus the attitude of children in horror that Weapons had? Because I'm thinking of that long sequence when you finally get the perspective of the one kid who didn't disappear from the class, and you see him dealing with the witch living in his house and the parents being possessed and almost immobile, and you feel such overwhelming, heart-rending sympathy for this kid in that he still has to go to school and somehow make do in this horrific circumstance. Did you still feel sympathy for these kids even after they became these vessels of evil? Did the attitudes diverge?
In a different way, but yes, I still did. That's the tragedy of the whole thing, is that the kids are being manipulated and changed and possessed and altered and ultimately harmed. So yeah, I do. It's just the sympathies that you're really that are pulled out of you are just come out of you in different ways in these films. Like with Weapons, I feel bad for the experience that this kid is having and the emotional turmoil he's experiencing versus the kids here who are maimed and, completely annihilated. It's also really tragic. And then you end up seeing the emotional effects on the adults comparatively. So it's just a different way to engage in that.
And for Weapons having this reputation for shock horror and being all about the kids in the school and the running away, am I wrong in thinking there's not much of that body horror with like inflicted upon the kids in weapons?
In weapons, yeah, I don't think so. Like we see violence on the adults for sure. We don't really see it on the kids. And again, I think that's an American sensibility.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think the most violence that we see inflicted on the kids in weapons is mental. It is psychological violence that the witch is inflicting upon the kid that she's taken up residence at his house.
But even there, you get the kind of slapstick catharsis at the end. I mean, our audience, or the theater when we saw it, everyone was cackling.
Oh, it was awesome
at the end. Mm-hmm. There's no catharsis of any kind. There's no humor of any kind in this film.
Well, and again, so the other prong of the story after the mother eating the child, basically what's happening in parallel with that is that Pedro and Mirta have found where the rotten is in the school, right? And you see this classroom of kids. They're awake. They're cogent. They're clearly under the influence of this like evil, but they're there and they're in the school and they're just kind of staring silently. And as Pedro and Mirta try to destroy this evil, and one of the girls ends up trying to tell them that the body of the rotten, which they need to get to, is actually located in a different place. Tries to lead them astray. Pedro's going to follow through with this, but Mirta is like, no. If she's telling us that it's somewhere else, then it's here. Because, again, evil loves children, or children want evil, whatever the case may be, it's in control. And then so, in a fit of just absolute rage, Pedro, who is our hero protagonist, just absolutely beats this little girl senseless. And at this point in time, he's not entirely sure if she's under the influence, because again, he doesn't really know the rules that well about all this stuff. Mirta seems to know, but he literally like tackles her and pummels her a little bit. She gets up and she ends up being alive still, but it shows him hitting her and stuff, and that was also shocking. That I've never seen that in an American film, but again, that's one of those things that sort of robs any sort the whatever might be left of the sympathy that we've got for Pedro too. Because while he's going through all this, and we want him to succeed in defeating the corpse, you get like, if he's willing to do that, why do we want him to succeed anyway? What else has he done that we haven't seen?
But he's still conflicted. Like, as brutal as that moment is, Mirta has to keep reminding him not to believe what the kids say, because he keeps still taking them at face value, even though they look fucked up and half demonic anyway. When they tell him, just to get him out of the way and distract him, they tell him, oh, there's an axe over there that you can use to get up the floorboards to do the thing, and blah, blah, blah. He believes them and goes over there, and they kill Mirta. So even though he's treating this child as possessed and as this like vessel of the devil, he can't help but also still treat them as kids and believe them, because there's no character in the film more connected to kids than this guy. He's got 3 kids, and that animates the entire plot.
Well, and it's the fear. Like, that's what the evil is manipulating and using, is his fear. And if you talk, I mean, the whole thing about this, what you said, is the corruption, the corruptive nature of humanity, and how we cannot get away from that. And so I think it's him simultaneously believing the kids and treating them as like regular people and trying to, do what he can to save his own children, while also being terrified and beating the shit out of a little girl. Like, that's the corruptive fear that's inside of him that he can't escape. So that's why he's so conflicted. And so, yeah, we do sort of have a moment of like, oh, Pedro, what the fuck are you doing? Like, even if I know, like, watching this film, that little girl is possessed, she's probably lying, she's not who she really is, I still, it's not like he's, sometimes you see like in a movie where there's violence with children, the adults will like kind of shake a kid, or like will hurt them, but not really, because they know that they're so overpowered compared to this child. He doesn't do that. He just like, he hits her like he's hitting a grown man. Like, it's actually really upsetting. And so you are so like not on board with what he's doing, but that's the corruption that's happening, that's taking place. And so of course, like, he's not going to win in this scenario. So it's interesting to sort of see that conflict, which makes him feel both human and also beyond human at the same time.
Yeah, this is, unless we have a final bit on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to put a bow on it, I think it is a physical manifestation of the theme and the cautionary tale that the movie, I think what we've established, is trying to tell us is that the evil that we do to the younger generation, it does leave a mark, and it does have an impact. And we've seen that play out, sort of tangentially, right, with all the violence to the young girl being done while the argument was going on between the parents. The dog is the one that does it there, but we drive the point home by having our hero actually committed. Like, there's nobody that's safe or is exempt from having the potential to invite this evil impact against a child, right? And I think that is the point that's being driven home at the end of this fable, is that if we think for 1 second that we are not doing this, or that we are incapable as adults of doing this to children, look what can happen.
Yes, and you brought up human nature earlier. I think there's this really insidious implication. It's even stronger than an implication that all of this is unavoidable, and in the way the story wraps up, and they're moving on to the next town, that it's guaranteed to repeat. It's incredibly bleak.
Yeah, it really was.
I want to move into the next kind of meat of the discussion, which is about, in turn, excess and restraint, and the further kind of contradictions in the film. And I'm glad we got to this early, because there's so much of this. But we all had the same observation watching this and kind of chatting about it a little afterwards, of how much further this film goes than any American horror film ever would or could. And I think that specifically is concentrated within children. Who is the question of who is the victim of the horror on screen, and what the audience sees of that. Because we've seen plenty of American horror movies with kind of sleight of hand tricks that imply really horrific stuff happening, but you don't ever see it. Maybe you hear it in the background or a silhouette in the next room, but this is full bore. And there's one of those kind of moving the goalpost moments about half a dozen times. I was trying to think of all of them when I was putting the notes together. There's the moment with the axe, the hammer, the dog, the car, the school, the brains, and the necklace at the end. So I guess the question is, in our compliment and our grappling with this idea of When Evil Lurks going so much further in its depiction of violence than any American film, than any other film we can really name, what is gained by showing that explicitly?
Yeah, it's interesting because the way we're describing it, it's hard to really pin down how this really comes across, because it's not excessive in the way that Terrifier is excessive. And that's an American film. That's an unrated American film. But that movie is very interested in gore and practical effects and in overdoing the gore for the sake of sort of shock value. And it's just contributing to, this is how ridiculously, horrifically evil Art the Clown is.
Depraved.
And many people would call that gratuitous or too much, and I'm never gonna think violence is gratuitous. I think if you're doing excessive gore, it's interesting and it's making a point, but that's not what this movie is doing. When Evil Lurks is not doing a ridiculous amount of gore. It's more that it's short moments, but they're incredibly impactful, and it's more I'm not gonna do this horrible thing for the sake of shocking you. It's more, this kind of thing can happen, and I'm not going to shy away from showing it. And so I guess it's letting us see, it's not shying away. It's letting us see horrific things that happen, and is not, trying to hide or sugarcoat the reality of something like this. I mean, I say reality, it's about possession and a demon and an intangible evil.
But it still feels that grounded. Well,
exactly. That's what we were saying earlier about the village. It feels out of time and place, but also so possible and real at the same time. And so I think it's striking that balance and showing these really intense moments of violence, but in a way that feels very real and possible. And so it's more just I think it's leaning into that inevitability. You can't shy away from it. You can't put it off screen. You can't pretend it's not there or ignore it. It's there, it's inevitable, it will move on to the next village and do it all again.
And because it's presented so matter of fact, are you saying that you think the violence almost further grounds the movie?
I think so, yeah, because I think if you kept a lot of it off screen, it would feel more intangible and surreal and dreamlike and impossible, which could be another interesting direction. It's not like this is the only way that it should be done. I'm never giving a prescription, but I think this decision is accomplishing, this goal of what you're talking about.
That's really interesting. Huh, I like that.
You could also call it a call to action, right? Because the act of seeing it, because we don't typically see that kind of violence imparted to children physically, you want to prevent it. You want to stop it from happening. I was reminded instantly whenever we see the shot from behind of the mother carrying Santino. I was reminded of that shot from The Walking Dead when you see the car seat bloodstained, and the implication is that Judith has been eaten out of it. And ultimately you see that in The Walking Dead that she has survived and it's okay, and you just had to contend with that feeling of horror for a little bit, and then it relented. Well, this is like seeing the car seat and then going to find the zombie that's still eating her little shoe, right? So that the worst case scenario has happened, and every part of you wants it to not be true and to prevent it from happening, but you can't, right? But that's in the movie. In real life, having a touchstone for what that horror might feel like, right? Obviously to a lesser degree, but imparting some sort of harm to a child, maybe the call to action is, okay, you see how terrible this can be? Do what you can to avoid it at all costs.
Because there are almost half a dozen of these watershed moments of violence or gore or whatever else it is, did you ever find that it was kind of a case of diminishing returns? Did you grow numb? Did they stop being impactful the more of them we had?
No, I don't think so, because there weren't all that many. I mean, it happened pretty regularly, but it didn't get old. Like, if there had been 5 more, maybe it would have been like, okay, we get it. So no. And they were short enough and impactful enough, and as much about character and plot as they were about, here's a horrible moment of violence because this is a horror film, we have to have violence. Like, they were all accomplishing something. So
they were pretty varied as well.
And they were varied. Yeah, it wasn't like, oh, we see people's heads getting chopped off over and over again. Oh, the same kind of thing. It was different every time. It was a different person every time. So it was impactful every single time.
I'm glad you brought up Terrifier as kind of a point of contrast here, because I'm always interested in the way people dismiss movies like Terrifier when they say it's just for shock value, or it's just a splatterfest, or any of these other terms that I consider a compliment. What they almost imply that seeing that much of that stuff makes it meaningless. Kind of breaking that Hitchcock rule of hearing the guy dragging the axe is scarier than seeing him. But I didn't find any drop-off in this entire runtime.
No, I didn't either. And the Terrifier thing, I mean, that could be a different conversation. Like, it's not doing the Hitchcock thing, but it's doing something else.
Yes,
and it's also effective. Like, you might prefer the Hitchcock, Jaws mentality, but that's not the only way to be effective and give you an effective villain and create horrifying images in your brain that you can't erase. But I think here, it's not even going as far as Terrifier, but it somehow makes a bigger impact for me. I mean, I love Terrifier, and that does make a huge impact, but I view Terrifier is a bit more, oddly enough, it's more fun. Like, because it's a slasher and it's about a clown and he's funny and it's weird,
and he's a mime, he's a clown.
Right,
yeah.
And it's dark, obviously, and there are great emotional highs in those movies, but here it's like, we're not having fun at all. This is not a fun slasher, like, ooh, blood, splatter, blah, blah, blah. It's more like, oh, this is horrible and this is really upsetting, and it's like, it's a deeply troubling story.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and I don't think that there's a morality to Terrifier. Right? I think that this is a deeply moral play, because we've been talking about this, and as I've been thinking through our entire discussion so far, I think maybe talking about violence imparted to children is a bit of too far of a reduction, because I don't think that you can divorce that concept from the fact that the evil, quote unquote, is this corrupted individual, this corruption of some sort, right? And it's in the adult's inability to deal with the corruption that corruption ultimately spreads to the children, and that manifests itself in violence and evil and death and physical violence. And so I think that is, I think, a more complete understanding of why this differs from anything else. The call to action is, yes, avoid the violence, but I think that the root of that is deal with the problem right? Deal with the rotten the right way instead of literally trying to drive it down the road and make it somebody else's problem. The officials ignoring it once we tried to ask for help, right? All of that. There were so many different places where there was a failure of Pedro and Jimmy and the adults in the situation to actually handle the problem. And guess what? By the end, it was all foisted off onto the children. The children are not equipped to handle it. So the corruption is pervasive at this point.
I love that modification. I think and I'm glad you've walked through so many of these elements of the violence and the gore, because they really are the hallmarks of this story. The one that stuck with me the most, I'm realizing after you said that, might be the only moment in the film where someone deals with the demon and wins. And it's the first, I think it was the first moment of standout violence within the film. And it's where Ruiz he sees the Black Phillip goat, and he's got the gun ready, and he's all shaky and nervous. And the pregnant wife is next to him, and she's telling him, you can't use guns. That'll only spread the demon and the infection. You can't do it that way. And he panics, and he shoots the goat. And as we see that kind of uncorking, we see the axe enter the frame that she's trying to give him to kill the goat instead. And she kills him with the axe. And it's just like one shot, and then he drops. And she falls to her knees, and then she turns the axe like facing herself, and she takes herself out too. But it takes like 30 seconds. And there's such heartache there. There's such unlivable regret. And like you said, kind of the call to action, the devastation that it leaves you with, the urge to never let a situation like this manifest again. That was almost the most affecting moment of violence for me. And the movie didn't pump it up at all. Like you said, Maggie, there's nothing fun about this movie, but particularly that scene, I don't know. I feel like I haven't been able to shake it for 24 hours.
How did you take that scene? Did you see it as she was trying to stop him from shooting the thing, and so then she killed him, and then she felt bad? Or do you think there was like a supernatural takeover of her?
No, not at all. No, absolutely not. I think it was that when he shot the goat, then the demon went from the goat into him, because that spreads it. So it was her being forced to take out the demon in its new vessel, which happened to be her husband. And then she just couldn't live with that and that new reality.
Interesting. What did you think?
I would agree with that. Now, as we've been talking it out, my perception has changed. Whenever I saw it initially, it was like, okay, well, that was so fast. Clearly, she's under the influence of this as well. But I would agree with you. If she killed him the right way, if you're not allowed to use firearms, she used the axe. And then I agree, she's pregnant at this point in time. She's just killed the father of her child and her husband, presumably somebody she loves very much. And in order to stop the bleeding and to stop the contagion from spreading, she kills herself. She removes herself from the equation, right? But that's also not put on a pedestal as the thing that you're supposed to do. She gets there in one respect, in that she does something about the problem. But in the way that she chooses to handle it, she also removes the potential life from the equation.
Yes.
She doesn't allow her child to be born, right? And I think that's the opposite end of the spectrum, right? I think it's a caution. Like, yes, we say we need to protect the children from this, handle the corruption, but the answer is not to stop having kids or to remove them from the equation at all. You can't handle it that way. That's not an effective solution. You have to do it some other way. You have to actually handle the problem instead of removing yourself from the equation.
And I think it complicates the discussion of cowardice that I kind of noticed in the margins of the film, particularly between Jimmy and Pedro, where every time they don't act or there's some sort of half measure when they try to drive the rotten out of town and he falls out of the back of the truck and they kind of don't deal with it and just run off and it's someone else's problem now, that sort of inaction is presented as the wrong move. But you're right that this woman's absolute action is also, I don't think that's presented as aspirational either. So it puts all of these people in an equally impossible and sympathetic position. It's an incredibly delicate touch for a movie that is so brutal, and I think that moves on to the counterpoint here. Instead of just talking about excess, I think the reason the excess works, the reason these horrific moments of violence work so well, is because of the restraint. And that's everywhere, from the way the camera is moved. Every time we reveal these moments of horror, it's this slow, like, dread-inducing pan. There's not a huge slam on the piano. There's not a jump scare. Even when you see the mom with the popcorn thing, the camera's just vaguely moving past the brother driving the car. So they're not juicing these moments at all. They're horrifying because they're horrifying. There's no, like, you talked about, Maggie, how grounded it feels. There's nothing cinematic to add to this. But there's also the dialogue we talked about feeling so simple. The evil loves children, children loves evil. I mean, it's like a bumper sticker. It's so bold and simple, but memorable. It's restraint. It's not overwriting the scene, and none of the lore is presented as these exposition dumps, despite having a Yoda character. There are also no churches, and you're not supposed to use guns. There's restraint baked into every single element of the film.
Well, I think that's how a fable is written, right? If this is a fable, it is simple. It's a simple concept. It's a simple story. It's simple dialogue. It's few characters. Nothing is over embellished. I mean, if you expand it out to like a fairy tale can be over embellished and have beautiful flowery language and can have all these like, interesting extra elements to it. But a fable is simple. And I think this is leaning into that compared to something that would be more romanticized or overdone. So I thought that element was perfect for this movie.
Yeah. And another example of that just in your face, this is what's going to happen. It's scary because it's happening in the absolute. Once the demon clearly works its way through Jair's mind, the oldest son of Pedro. Again, the entire film, we've seen him be nonverbal, and really he doesn't walk or move anywhere. He simply, and this happens whenever Jimmy and Pedro go off to handle their things, their individual missions. The mother of Pedro, the grandmother of the children, is left behind at Mirta's house, and we know that Jair was out in the car. Right? Well, the scene switches back to the house and we see the grandmother. Jair just walks into the house. He simply walks in and talks like normal, like nothing is wrong. And he's like, "Hey, Grandma, can you make me something warm? I'm kind of parched." And that's the last time we see Grandma until later in the film. Jair is now operating under the pretense that he is still impacted and nonverbal. He's eating the apple ice cream that his father promised him so early in the film. And it come to find out he ends up vomiting up part of the grandmother that he's eaten. And we see this terrifying image where the way that his condition is portrayed throughout the film as he sort of has a blank 1,000-yard stare. During this process of him vomiting up, Pedro is seeing this and he's kind of horrified. The camera pans back over to Jair and he sort of flicks his eyes over to Pedro, and he's like taking it in, the fact that he's feasting on the horror that Pedro is seeing here. And then his eyes flick back and he's back to continuing the pretense. But terrifying. And there wasn't any weird musical cues. There wasn't any slow build. It was both the time where Jair came into the house just like nothing was the matter, and in a seemingly such an innocent act of just eating ice cream, it comes upon you, and it's just this terrifying image that it's presented in such a way that is so authentic and unafraid. It's going to show you what it is. That's not the scary part. The scary part is that it is happening at all.
Yes, I know you're desperate to jump in here, please.
Sorry, good. No, well, so what's interesting about that is we've been talking about how this movie doesn't shy away from violence. We show everything. We don't see him eat the grandmother. We don't see that happen. And I don't think that's because, we ran out of budget, or, we couldn't possibly show a kid eating his grandmother. That would be too horrible. This movie has demonstrated that it is not afraid to show the horrific things. Instead, what it's interested in highlighting is the impact it has on Pedro, and sort of the way that Jair, in his possessed form, is feeling about this situation. So the impact, the moment of horror, is not him eating the grandmother. It's Pedro realizing it has occurred. It's the vomiting up of the necklace that is the reveal that it is in fact his grandmother. I mean, and we've kind of, as this movie unfolded, we all kind of guessed, he's eating the grandma. Like, we all knew it was happening, even if we didn't see it. So the movie is, again, demonstrating that restraint of, I don't need to show him eating the grandmother. Instead, I want the moment of impact to be when Pedro understands that's what has occurred. So I thought that was a really interesting way to have that simultaneous excess and restraint all at the same time.
Yeah, because the moments of gore we do see, the flashes of violence we do see, they all serve character or story. So if it's just grandma unknowingly and the possessed kid, that doesn't serve any of the existing characters, so we don't. Also, logistically, it would be one bite at a time. How do you approach that? But Tristan, I love, just from a filmmaking perspective, what you're describing as one of the most magical and disturbing moments in the movie is an actor walking, talking, and moving his eyes. Like, this is the magic of indie horror. It's all in the script. You don't need a massive budget to do all of these really horrifying sequences. It's just great storytelling. And to Maggie's point, I never felt the restrictions of a budget either. This felt like such a complete vision, and even to compare it to The Witch, because I really do think that's the number one corollary here, this felt bigger than The Witch, and I guarantee you it had a much smaller budget, even than The Witch, which had no budget. But in terms of scope and locations, the fact that we see the police, that we go through most of the town in various locations. In The Witch, we're on the wagon, we're at the house. That's it. And then we walk up a hill at the end. So I loved how expansive this was through creative means. And I think that is working within creative limitations, working within budgetary restraints, that this still shines. It's I'll never get over how much fun it is to talk about indie horror, because it's maybe the most creative type of film.
I totally agree. And I will say, earlier I had said, I don't even know if this filmmaker even, saw The Witch. I changed my mind, because I'm remembering now, early in the film, when they first discover the dead body of the cleaner who's supposed to come get rid of the rotten, or maybe it's right after, it doesn't matter. They're about to go into the woods, and you see this shot that's of the entrance to the woods, and it looks very ominous and strange. And to me, that felt like a scaled down, more grounded version of that shot of the woods we see in The Witch, which is one of my favorite visual moments in that movie, is the first time you see the woods and how ominous and mythical and frightening they look, even though it's just a shot of trees. And I think that shot of the woods in this movie had a very similar effect. So you know what? Maybe he maybe did see The Witch, and I love that.
But even with the creature design, I love that we don't see, as much as I was yearning for that Rosemary's Baby moment, and that film also denies you that moment of seeing what the baby looks like. I love that we never saw full reveals of the monster. Even when we saw its rebirth at the end, it was covered in blood and indirect, and we didn't know if that was a host or its final form. And the rest of the scary stuff you see is people who look sick, or they're hosts that are deteriorating. You see shadows moving in a weird way. And if this is a possession movie, we can't end this discussion without talking, at least for a second, about The Exorcist.
Oh, sure.
And I thought this movie lived up to the spirit of The Exorcist more than it ever tried to ape any of those defining genre conventions. Because one of the lines that really sticks with me more than anything else in The Exorcist is when the demon says that showing its true form and true power would be a much too vulgar display of power. And I thought this film, being an indie horror that was scrappy and creative and thoughtful, lived up to that ethos, to the point that I'm comfortable putting this in the pantheon of possession movies, if not indie horror and horror in general. Do you guys feel that way?
Yes, and I think you're right, because this movie is not... I think this would break down somebody else's argument that this movie shows too much, because it doesn't. It knows when to show everything and when to hold back. So the fact that it's not showing the full final form of the demon, of the evil, I think is not only just demonstrating, hey, we can show restraint and we're doing it intentionally, but the intentional part of it is that this kind of thing would be intangible. I think once you see the full demon reveal in a movie like this, it doesn't ruin it. And I think getting demon reveals is always really interesting. I'm thinking of Insidious, that's interesting, but
Malum.
Right. But when it remains intangible, when it remains in your imagination, I think that has the effect of making it all feel more possible and inevitable and connected to humanity. It's not just this external thing that we can see and fight and prevent from encroaching on our lives. We can't find it. We can't identify it. We can't pin it down. And that leads into the inevitability that this movie is sort of showcasing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it echoes the inevitability that we're introduced to in Evil Dead. It's the same. The zombies or the demons in this one, they are perverted versions of regular people. And they have this sort of demonic sensibility where they're saying, oh, yes, we're going to get you out. But then it's also, they have the memories of the people from before. You see that when Sabrina, after she's run over by a car, can still operate her cell phone and calls Pedro and is basically like, I'm going to get you. Also, you're a piece of shit. It's why I cheated on you so many times. That just gut-wrenching, again, the tapping into the humanity and the fears and the anger that's inherent in the emotion of the host, and the impact that can have on the people that the host knew. That is clearly a concept that is borrowed or inspired by something that I don't know that I saw before or that predates the Evil Dead. Obviously, you had The Exorcist and everything, but it was a little bit different.
Yeah, totally.
You could say that Reagan in The Exorcist is very similar to the what are they called in
Deadites?
Deadites. There you go. You could say that that's a very similar form of possession, but that's carried over here, and I think these are more human than in those other ones, because like physically, yes, there are injuries because some of them are dead. But ultimately, the way that they act and the way that they talk, it's still closer to human than demon. But then you see these awful acts that they perform, right? And I think those are more violent and more affecting than anything that you even see in The Evil Dead or The Exorcist, because there the fear comes from it looks scary and it's saying really awful things. But here, it's a real fear because they are going to do terrible things.
Yeah, I feel like the nods to The Evil Dead were slight enough that they still worked, because I did a little bit of digging in interviews and things, and The Evil Dead was an inspiration for this film. The writer-director said that in an interview. And I think the rotten being a puppet is a nod to the puppetry that they had to use in The Evil Dead, but also the moments of greatest gore in The Evil Dead are like stop motion at the end of the film. So you're right, that's where it becomes slapstick or silly, and there's none of that here. But I did, the first second when I saw Sabrina eating the brains, I thought, oh, that's kind of like a zombie. Like eating the brains. And that was just a little bit of a, oh yeah, that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, like you said before. I love those tiny nods to lineage. To kind of tease out a hypothetical and wrap this up, if this movie had unlimited budget, because we're talking about the restraint here and the punches that they had to pull, either for financial reasons or more seemingly creative reasons, if this film had gone even further into the excess or had more money here, do you think it would have served the story? Do you think there was anything lacking from this form of a threadbare indie horror film?
No. I think it's like perfect as is, because as you were asking that, I was like, okay, what could they have done? I guess they could have gone to another village. We could have had more kills. We might have actually seen the demon. I think all those things would have like done the film a disservice. I think its containment and restraint and absolutely like really effective and efficient utilization of the resources that it had were perfect. I genuinely don't see a way to improve this film. I think that's why I love indie horror, because you're playing in a smaller box. And so you have to craft something that works well for the small box you're in. I think it becomes like good indie horror knows what's going to work within its restraint. It's not like trying to make a bigger movie, but within a smaller, budget or set of constraints. It's more like, this works perfectly for the scenario I'm in, and so I'm going to make a movie that works well here, versus like, yeah, this could have been bigger, but we had to show a lot of stuff or had to cut a lot of stuff out, or it's all off screen. Like, but no, this movie is doing exactly what it can do within the constraints that it has. So no, I wouldn't change anything.
It's almost made to scale.
Exactly. Yeah, and no notes, right? There's no, I don't think that you improve this with budget. In fact, I think if you've got more budget, you might ruin an aspect of the quality of the film, because the first thing that I could think of that you could spend more money on is actors with name recognition, right? And maybe these are well-known actors in Argentina. Never having seen an Argentinian film, I don't know. But I don't personally know any of these actors. So if you hired somebody with some name and face recognition, that's one way to spend the money. But I think it was really impactful and helpful that I didn't know any of these people, because it truly exists as a fable in my mind. I don't know these actors names in real life. I don't see them on the red carpet. So there's nothing pulling me out of my suspension of disbelief. And so if you put more money into this, I mean, you've got locations, you could do more CGI, you could show like a full body scene of the new evil being birthed, like rising out of the thing. You could have cool things like that. But none of it serves the impact that the film ultimately had. And because we're sitting here talking about it at the length and depth that we're talking about it right now, I don't think anything else was necessary to change. I think this is a director's and a writer's vision fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect note to wrap on, because all the films we've compared it to, we've talked about some of our very favorite movies, whether it's The Evil Dead, The Exorcist, or even The Witch. And I'm comfortable putting this right on the shelf next to those.
Absolutely. Here's one thing I'll say. I think if they'd had a bigger budget, they should have made the exact same movie and just paid everybody like 10 times more. Like, everybody deserves a pay raise for making this amazing film. Like, that's the only thing that this budget should have gone to. Not adding more things or changing anything, just having everybody be even better compensated, because it was that good.
If you want even more episodes from us, you can check out the Patreon that even Maggie doesn't remember. $2 a month, you can support the show.
Most of the time, I don't forget the stuff we talked about, but every now and then I do forget. What's really alarming me is that must have been recent, because we saw that movie like 2 weeks ago.
Indeed.
So I can't remember.
We see a lot of movies.
The fact that I can't remember recording about that is actually quite alarming.
But you can get access to that episode and the whole catalog back of bonus
bad
episodes that we've piled up over the last number of years. We also have many series with Tristan. He's on our House of the Dragon discussions, episode by episode, and our early Diablo 4 episodes going through the whole campaign.
Yes.
Also scattered other episodes. He and I talked about Van Helsing. We talked about normal people.
I think our first episode we did, the three of us, was about Malignant, that James Wan film that came out a few years ago.
Yes, it was. He was the counterpoint.
Yes, he was very, very fine. So if you want to hear more of him, check it out. If you want more of our other things, check out Cam's latest book, Lemon Tarts in Space. Speaking of indie creative endeavors, Lemon Tarts in Space is a light sci-fi dark comedy, but it's got elements of horror in it for sure. It's Flubber meets Friday the 13th. It is...
And I'm in it.
That's right. That's right. Tristan is in it, friends. I was getting there. It's Alien meets Monty Python, but no, it is a regular book that you can read just as a novel, ebook, paperback, or listen to the audio drama, which stars Tristan. So if you want to hear more of his dulcet tones.
And Cam.
Yes, Cam is also in it. They co-star together. It is a wonderful, delightful time. I'm also in it. I have a tiny little role.
Yes, you do. A cameo.
So go check that out. Links for that in the description down below. Thank you very much for listening. Tristan, any final words?
No, that's it. That's a wrap, folks.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for listening. Like, subscribe, etc. We'll catch you here in just a few days with another brand new episode.